Welcome back to the Just Fantasy Baseball podcast on a beautiful, sunny, summer, dare I say, day here in New York. My name is Rami and it's beautiful outside, and I can't wait. It's exciting. Vince is not here today, and I am kind of, it's funny that he's not here of all days because we'll get to it in the prospect report. Usually, if Vince wasn't here, I probably wouldn't even have a prospect report because I'm not the big prospect guy, if you know the show. But I got a good one today. I got a great. So you want to stay tuned for that. We got a whole lot going on, though. Obviously, big week, big fantasy baseball week. Baseball's in full swing. We had a lot of day baseball today on this Wednesday, and you're probably listening to this thinking, no, it's Thursday already. Yeah, by now you're listening to it's Thursday. But I watched some day baseball today, and I'm getting ready for another Knicks playoff game. Basketball, you know I love my hoops. So lots of stuff to get to. And I got to kick it right off right now as we start with the biggest headline, with some headlines. The biggest headline to me, and it's not fantasy related, but it could be, because one of the guys who's been heating up lately might have a monkey off his shoulder, might have some little stress coming off his back, if you will. And that is, of course, Shohei Ohtani, who Ipe Mitsuhara, his interpreter, just plead guilty to all the to the fraud, I guess. I don't know if all the allegations against him, but maybe that is why, and we'll get to our hot and not and a little foreshadowing here, Shohei Ohtani has been tearing the cover off the ball lately. And think about what Ohtani's been going through. He's been rehabbing from an injured elbow. He's been hitting the cover off the ball on a new team, adjusting to that. Obviously, it's not a big adjustment. The team's great. But he's also been dealing with this stuff in his personal life with a good friend of his, whether he's guilty or not. Who knows what's going on with Ipe Mitsuhara? Well, now it seems like you could put that to bed, where there'll be a trial, there'll be everything. But it seems like it's officially not Shohei Ohtani who was involved or doing any of this. It's officially Ipe Mitsuhara, who's either an incredible friend and is just the greatest fall guy ever, or actually did this. And it seems more likely that it's the latter, unfortunately. And it's just an unfortunate situation. It goes from like a crazy, whoa, sports story to just almost like a sad story where who knows what was going on in this guy's life and in this guy's personal life that he felt he had to betray a friend of his like this. I'm sure we all go through things in our lives that are struggles sometimes and aren't easy, but to think like what it would have to get to in your life, if you could think about that, for you to get to the point where you take a guy who's your closest friend, who's with you every single day, and you betray him to that point. I mean, that's got to be, pretty tough. And so I feel for him more than anything else, in a weird way. I feel for Ipe Mitsuhara, but for Shohei Ohtani, I'm happy it seems like it's all behind him. Now, the other big story when it comes to pitchers is Shota Imanaga apparently is human because he gave up 2 runs. And there was a tweet, and I forget who it was. It might have even been Nightingale, but if you look at it, I'm going to find it right now at Baseball Images that precede. There was a tweet, and I'll just tell you what it was. That was basically like, this guy hasn't given up a run in this amount. And of course, it was Nightingale. It's always freaking Bob Nightingale. Shota Imanaga may be the Chicago Cubs' greatest free agent signing since Andre Dawson in 1987. If he keeps pitching like this, Imanaga 5-0, throws 7 more shutout innings, and now has a .65 ERA in his first 7 MLB starts. Well, guess what? He gave up a 2-run homer, I think. I think that's what it was. And his ERA has ballooned now over 1. And when you're talking about a guy who was at 0.65, it ballooned over 1. And let me see. The Cubs still won the game. And let me find Imanaga's line. He ultimately does not get the win, but yeah, 7 innings, 2 runs, the 2 earned. So just kind of funny. Bellinger came back with the home run also. So I know Vince is looking out for his Cubbies. Yes, it was in the 8th inning. Jurickson Profar gets the 2-run home run. A guy who's also been hot that we talked about on the podcast, Jurickson Profar. But who would it have been but Bob Nightingale to write, who's wrong about everything always, to write Shota Imanaga, 7 more shutout innings. And then, of course, he came out for the 8th inning, and he gave up a 2-run home run and didn't get an out of the 8th. Hopefully that doesn't totally throw off his career. I still think he's a really good pitcher, but it's just funny how that works out sometimes. Now, another story, and I saw this recently, and so I just wanted to bring it to the attention of the podcast. It is fantasy related, although it's not directly correlated to fantasy baseball, but one of the best closers in baseball. And if you're not aware of who this guy is, you should be buying stock in this guy. He's definitely not available in leagues. He's in almost all leagues. And, I like to call there's the Hardo leagues, and then there's the more ESPN and Yahoo leagues. He might be available if you don't know who this guy is. but he's probably not available in your league. If he is somehow available, go get him. That's Robert Suarez, who's the closer for the San Diego Padres. He's awesome. He's got 11 saves on the year. He's 14 strikeouts in 15 innings and a .59 ERA and a .72 whip. The guy's ridiculous. But better than that, since his first couple starts of the year, or opportunities of the year, outings of the year, he has only thrown fastballs. And I saw this story somewhere where he's going to try and ride it out. He's basically Jacob deGrom at times. Jacob deGrom does this for a couple innings at a time. Sometimes the first time through the order, he'll only throw fastballs just to see what he can get away with because he was that good and he's that dominant. It's funny with this guy, Robert Suarez, he's a closer, so he doesn't need to throw multiple innings, doesn't need to face the lineup multiple times. So he comes in and just, all right, good morning, good afternoon, good night, throws fastball. Sometimes a cutter, sometimes it's a two-seamer, sometimes a four-seamer, maybe a little sinking action, but it's all fastballs, and it's an incredible story. So I wanted to point that out. Now, we do have an injury. You see headlines and injuries are the title of this segment. So the injury update, and this is an unfortunate one. If you saw this yesterday, this was crazy. But my guy, Wilson Contreras, who's on my fantasy team, and he's one of the guys I talked up before the year. I saw, the second half was incredible. He broke his arm on a play that was a catcher's interference. You see how close he is. You see how far back JD Martinez is standing, trying to just wait on that fastball as long as he can, right? And he swings down, and the bat hits the arm, the outstretched arm of Wilson Contreras. Just an awful sight to see. Not a fun thing, not a good look. Unfortunate moment there, and he broke his arm. Like, it actually broke his arm. So he'll probably be reevaluated maybe in a couple of months, maybe a month at least. So just a sad situation, obviously, for the Cardinals and for fantasy owners who owned Wilson Contreras like myself. Now we need to find a catcher to replace him. So a little bit of an unfortunate injury there, and it's not going to be a short-term injury. It doesn't seem like either. That's the headlines for now. Let's get to who's hot and who's not, and it's brought to you by nobody. I'm just like used to saying that a segment, when we do segments, is usually brought to you by someone. If you like the hat, you go to Hooga House, use my code RAMI to get 15% off your order. But I mean, they're not sponsoring the podcast in any way, shape, or form, or sponsoring this segment. But habitually, I said sponsored by. I don't know why I said it. All right. Who's hot and who's not? Time for who's hot and who's not. Who's hot? I'll give you a bunch of guys, and I'm going to do it a little bit different. I'm kind of going to combine the next two, but then I have two for sure buys and two for sure sells. But I want to give you a little bit more because Vince isn't here. I'll give you more than just the usual three who's hot and three who's not. I'll give you a couple more on each end. So the first guy I have for you who is hot is Luis Gil of the New York Yankees. In his last two starts, he's thrown 12 1/3 innings and has 10 strikeouts, a .73 ERA, and a .65 whip. He's gotten wins in both of those starts. And those starts came on the road in Baltimore against Corbin Burns and at home against the Astros at Yankee Stadium against Justin Verlander. So it's not like he's playing garbage. And I know the Astros they've been putting the ass in Astros the last few weeks, pun intended. And Justin Verlander was terrible last night. But still, this guy, Luis Gil, is quietly becoming one of the most reliable pitchers in the American League. I think he can keep it up. He is hot right now. I'll give you another two pitchers before we move on to the hitters. Zach Wheeler, who I talked about as much as I could before the season. I want him in every league. I want him on every team. I need Zach Wheeler, big Zach Wheeler supporter. He's the best fantasy baseball pitcher. And somehow I ended up with no Zach Wheeler on any team. I don't know how that happened, that I don't have Zach Wheeler on any team when I'm quite possibly the biggest Zach Wheeler supporter of anyone. Any fantasy baseball show, any fantasy baseball podcast. A guy who lives in New York and claims to love the Mets. Now, I do love the Philadelphia Phillies also. Not because I love the Phillies, just because I love their team. I love Kyle Schwarber. I love Trey Turner. I loved Rhys Hoskins when he was there. I love Bryce Harper. He's always been one of my favorite players. And I love Zach Wheeler. And Zach Wheeler, he's lights out. And he's always lights out. In the last 2 weeks, he's thrown 18 innings. That's 3 starts. He's 3-0, gotten 3 wins, 25 strikeouts in those 18 innings, and a .5 ERA with a .89 whip. First of all, his ERA is lower than his whip. And his whip is minuscule also. On the season now, his numbers, he's 4-0 on the season. Now, again, he's gotten 3 of those 4 wins in the last 2 weeks, in the last 3 starts. 63 strikeouts in 49 1/3 innings, a 1.64 ERA on the year, and a .89 matches his whip from the last 2 weeks. That's his whip on the year. Mind-boggling numbers right now for a guy who in general is one, and my hat is, if you're watching this, my hat is crooked and I can't figure out how to fix it because it's like the mirror camera. Sorry, I sometimes get off track, and that's why Vince is usually here to keep me in check. This is going to be off the rails this episode. I mean, there's nobody here. I'm alone. Woohoo! Anyone want to keep me in check? No, just me rocking. This is what happens sometimes, and even then, when I'm working on WFAN, but when I'm hosting a solo show at 3:00 in the morning, are you kidding me? And there's no. Sometimes there's always like producers there, but when it's just me rocking, it's funny. Anyway, yeah, I should get back to the show, to the episode, but Zach Wheeler, always the most reliable starting pitcher, and it's ridiculous that he is doing it again and is like exceeding even the expectation that you had of him. So Zach Wheeler, incredibly hot right now. If you have him, you're not trying to trade him. If you don't have him, you're not getting him in a trade. I would give anything for Zach Wheeler. So yeah, if there's someone who's like for some reason willing to offer you something for Zach Wheeler, hey, I'll take Zach Wheeler. Give me Zach Wheeler. I want Zach Wheeler so bad. Like literally, I would trade half my team for Zach Wheeler right now. That's not a good thing. Patrick Sandoval is a guy who's available, and he's equally as hot. No, not equally, but he's almost as hot as Zach Wheeler. And what you love about Patrick Sandoval in his last 2 starts, he's thrown 12 innings, has only 1 win for the LA Angels, but he has 17 strikeouts in 12 innings, a 1.5 ERA, and a lower whip, a 0.83 whip. So Patrick Sandoval, we just talked about a guy who's definitely taken in 100% of leagues and always rostered. In Yahoo leagues, Patrick Sandoval is only rostered in 6% of leagues. He's available. You can go add him. And I'm not telling you he's going to be keeping this up and great for the rest of the season, but man, the last 2 starts have been insane for him. And really the last 3 starts have been very solid. If he can keep that up, bring the season numbers down a little bit, he has almost a 5 ERA on the season. So if he can kind of steady that a little bit, this could be one of the most underrated. There was a guy I picked up off waivers around this time last year, and I've told this story on the podcast before, but I want to tell it again. And it's my podcast. I'm here alone. I don't know if I mentioned that. So I can do whatever I want. So last year, I picked up Blake Snell because he was struggling with command, and he was walking a lot of guys. He didn't have a great ERA. He had a slow start to the season. And I picked him up off waivers in beginning of May, probably this time of year. And he turned out to be one of the best pitchers I had on my team. He won the Cy Young Award. And while he wasn't the best fantasy pitcher, despite winning the Cy Young Award, he was extremely valuable to the success of my fantasy team last year and pivotal to the success of my fantasy team last year. So guys like Luis Heel, who's now getting picked up a ton. He's up like 15% in the last week alone because of how well he's pitching. But a guy like Patrick Sandoval also only 6% roster in Yahoo leagues. Go try and find those guys. They could be league winners. You can still find league winners, and we'll get to the buy low, sell high a little bit later. There are guys that are league winners on waivers still at this point in the season. All right, let's get to some hitters. And I want to start with one who a lot of people probably thought, well, this is the end for him. And I'm not telling you to buy high, buy low on him or sell high. I want to hold. I don't know what to do with him yet. But that's Jay Cronenworth. A lot of people thought that his time, he plays a bunch of positions, mostly first and second base. A lot of people thought that with Luis Arraez coming in San Diego, that meant the end for Jay Cronenworth and his playing time. He's taken that and said, well, yeah, I'm going to get 27 at-bats this week, have a 393 on-base percentage, just hit a couple homers, have 5 RBIs, a stolen base, 3 runs scored. I'm going to be hot as ever because I need to earn this spot now. It's earned. It's not given. So great week from Jay Cronenworth, who's still trying to earn that playing time over a guy, obviously, like Luis Arraez, who was brought in. So I'm not sure. Again, I say hold with him. I don't know what to do with him at this point, but hold on. If you have him, hold on. If you don't, if he's available on waivers for some reason in your league, he probably isn't. He's like rostered in most leagues, like at 90%, and even in Yahoo leagues. But if you somehow can pick him up, maybe I'm not saying he's going to get great playing time, but maybe there's this kind of added pressure to him that he wants to have more success. A guy we mentioned on last episode who's been, so he has a lot of RBIs coming up with clutch hits, but his on base is still leaves something to be desired. But if you look at the last 2 weeks, 14 RBIs, 10 runs scored, 3 stolen bases, 4 home runs. So in 2 weeks, it's a lot of production. Francisco Lindor, and I want to talk about him because we brought him up on last episode as a guy who's been hot. So I promised I'd mention him as a hot guy here. Lindor's always been a slow starter. He always is a slow starter. If you're a Met fan, you know that. If you're a Guardians fan, you know that. So I expect him to take off here. Now, I'd love to see the on base go up way more. I mean, on the year, he's still at 283 on base, which is just so low. Even 296 is low for a shortstop who's like in the middle of that order. He should be a lot higher. He should be at least like in the 330s around. Last year, he was close to 340. You'd expect him to hover around there. So I expect him to get that up a little bit. But if this is the beginning of his hot streak, then that's good for you for Francisco Lindor owners. I'm bouncing around a little bit here, but let's get to another one. A guy who's my favorite player. I just mentioned him earlier, Bryce Harper. He has a 600 on-base percentage in the last week. So you go from a guy who has a terrible on-base percentage to a guy, look, this is a guy who's going to have a 400 on-base percentage this year. That's what Bryce Harper does when he's healthy. And in the last 2 weeks, he's at 491. So almost 500. He has 3 home runs, 10 RBIs, and 7 runs in just 18 at-bats. He's 8 for 18 with 3 home runs, 10 RBIs, and 7 runs scored, and a 600 on-base percentage in the last week. So this has been one of the best players in fantasy baseball this year total. And in the last week, he's been actually maybe the best, if not second to best fantasy baseball player. So Bryce Harper, good to see him continuing to stay alive. And I mentioned a guy who has the monkey off his shoulder. Have you seen what Shohei Ohtani is doing in the last week alone? He is the number 1 fantasy baseball player in the last week. In 17 at-bats, he's 10 for 17. He has a 682 on-base percentage, nearly 700 on-base percentage. He has 7 runs scored. He's hit 4 homers and 8 RBIs, and he also has 4 stolen bases. How do you have 4 stolen bases and 4 home runs and 8 RBIs, 7 runs scored with 10 hits and only 17 at-bats in 1 week? Tell me how you do that. And you're Shohei Ohtani. With all the stuff going on around him, he's still been one of the best players in baseball. And a 682 on base, Shohei Ohtani is insane. And he is most certainly hot. The last hot that I'm going to give you is a guy who I want to try and find you these diamonds in the rough. I told you there's value. Abraham Toro from the Oakland Athletics. He's a diamond in the rough type of guy. 448 on base in the last week. 408 on base in the last 2 weeks. Not a ton of power, but he's 11 for 27, so it's a big sample size. He's getting a lot of hits, a home run, 4 RBIs, and he's scoring some runs. 5 runs scored in the last week on an Oakland team that I know that big one, offensive outburst, so maybe things are a little bit skewed. But on the year now, he's up to 339. He has 14 runs, has 15 runs, 14 RBIs, three home runs, a stolen base. This is a guy who maybe, back end, you need someone, middle infield, corner infield, you could put him on, utility. See what you're getting out of him. If in a week it doesn't work out, you cut him. He's rostered in 11% of Yahoo leagues. Good flyer guy. Just take a flyer on him. Abraham Toro has been hot. Unfortunately, with every hot guy comes some not hot. And so we get to the not hot. And this is a guy who we talked about on last week. And we said, I want to buy low on him. I still want to buy low on him. But he's been proving me wrong. And it's frustrating. He's 1 for his last 19, 3 for his last 40. In the last 2 weeks, he has a 119 on base percentage with no home runs, only a single run scored and a single RBI. He's got only 1 home run on the year and a 246 on base percentage. This has been an atrocious year, and I still believe I would buy low on Bo Bichette. Buy low on Bo. Buy low on Bo. It rhymes. It's great. It's perfect. And I'll tell you, you should still be buying low on Bo Bichette. It looks awful right now. What I told you last week looks terrible. I hope it gets better. I believe it will get better. I think their offense, the whole, has to get better. Maybe they're still in hockey season in Canada, and they feel like we know we're supposed to suck at hockey because they always do. So maybe they feel like we can't get going until hockey season is over. So maybe that like takes them to June. But I do think Bo Bichette's going to get going sooner or later. And you know what? This is actually good. Spin zone right here. Him having a 100 on base percentage in the last 2 weeks. This is good. If you're a Bo owner, don't trade him. Hold. If you're looking to trade, get some Bo Bichette in action up in here. Get Bo Bichette. I'm telling you, he's going to be good. He's going to pick it up. There's just too much of a track record of him being good to not pick it up. He was traded in my league. He was traded for nothing. He's been that bad. He was traded for, I forget what it was. I vetoed the trade. I said, no. Bo's going to be great. Bo's going to pick it up. I believe in Bo. I forgot the rhyme I just said earlier. Shoot. Buy low, Bo. Buy low on Bo Bichette. That's what I'm telling you. All right. The other buy low. No, sorry, that's not what we're doing. The other cold, because there's a couple of guys who have been cold, is Lourdes Gurriel Jr. Lourdes Gurriel Jr. is 1 for his last 15 and only 2 for his last 37. He started off hot with his new team in Arizona, or not new team, but in Arizona, and now he's been awful. He has no home runs, no RBIs, no stolen bases, only 1 run scored in the last 2 weeks, and a .054 on base in the last 2 weeks. That's upsetting. This is a guy who's not supposed to be this bad. He's rostered in most leagues. As of 2 weeks ago, he was rostered probably 95% of leagues. Now it's a little lower than that. I'm not sure what you do with him. We know Arizona is going through it a little bit. Obviously, we talked about Corbin Carroll a few times. I don't know what to tell you. This is a guy who should be a top 30 outfielder in fantasy baseball. And his season rank right now is 167th. And that's because of the hot start. Over the last month, he's ranked 600th in fantasy baseball. That is atrocious for Lourdes Gurriel, and I hope he can turn it around. Another guy who also should be a top 30 outfielder and has just been god awful this year, and especially in the last. Well, no, he was good to start the year. Also, another guy who's just atrocious the last week. 0 for his last 18, 0 for, and a .53. It was .053 on base percentage. No home runs, no RBIs, no stolen bases, no runs scored. Michael Harris. It's funny. We talked about him. Somebody asked, hey, should I trade for Michael Harris? What should I do? Should I trade Michael Harris? We said, no, do not trade Michael Harris. Are you crazy? Hold on to Michael Harris. Sorry, buddy. Maybe you should have traded Michael Harris because this is not good. Not looking good for Mike. And it's not the type of guy I'd want to tell you to trade. I still wouldn't tell you to trade him, but not looking great. Another guy, Craig Kimbrell, and this is all year. He has a 13 ERA the last 2 weeks, a 4.5 whip. He does have 2 saves, but in 2 2/3 innings, 5 strikeouts. He's just blowing saves left and right. Every time he comes up and he's giving up runs. On the season, he's got almost a 4 ERA, 3.5 really. And so while the save numbers are good for the Orioles, at some point you wonder, are the Orioles going to move off of him as the closer? And that's where you could get in trouble. If you can get off of Craig Kimbrell, it's almost not even a buy low. It's almost like get out sooner rather than later, because maybe someone thinks that he's still going to be getting saves come June and July and August for the Orioles. I'm not so sure. They have other arms in that bullpen they can go to. And if he starts not getting the 9th inning, not getting the save opportunities, then he's worth nothing. Right now, he's still worth something. Still has 8 saves on the season. If he starts losing those save opportunities, forget it. You got to cut bait right away. So I would cut bait on Craig Kimbrell. I don't trust him. I don't think the Orioles are going to trust him in the long term. Even if it's July or August, they could make a trade for a closer, and that knocks him out of his spot. I really don't trust him. I really don't think the Orioles do. I would get rid, and you're not going to get a ton for him, but see if you can get at least anything, because it's better than getting nothing later. Another pitcher who's struggling is Framber Valdez. We mentioned the Astros earlier struggling as a whole, and obviously Justin Verlander. Well, here's another one. The last 2 weeks, 6.10 ERA in 10 innings. 8.44 ERA in the last week. He had 3 strikeouts and 5 in the 3rd inning. So not terrible. On the season, still good numbers. 3.97 though. The ERA has ballooned a little bit, and the whip has gone up to 1.41. He'll turn it around, but just, for the sake of the segment, buy low, sell high. He's cold. Or sorry, cold. Who's hot? Who's not? He's not hot. Another pitcher, again, who I believe in, is going to be great, has a great season, is having a great season. Last 2 weeks, hasn't been good. Logan Webb. 10 strikeouts in 7 2/3 innings is nice. No wins and a 9.39 ERA, 2.61 whip. So a couple of rough starts for Logan Webb and Framber Valdez. They'll be fine. I believe it. I believe they'll be fine. But just, again, for the sake of the who's hot, who's not segment, had to throw them in there. Now we get to buy low and sell high, and I keep mistakenly saying that, so I'm happy we're finally at this segment. I am buying the stock of Tanner Bybee. Cleveland's a good team. They win games. He's been not good this year. He started off the year strong. Since then, the last month, he has a 4.5 ERA, 4.67 ERA. He's still getting strikeout numbers, 39 strikeouts in 36 innings this year. He does have 2 wins. He just hasn't been himself. A 10.8 ERA over the last week, and his last start was really rough. So, again, not the greatest run right now for Tanner Bybee. I still believe in him as a starting pitcher for Cleveland that needs starting pitching. So I would buy low on Tanner Bybee. Now for my sell high, I will give you a guy who unfortunately, if you're Vince D'Amato, you probably think this is who he is. He came up last year and shocked the world, was incredible. But he kind of fell off after that. And now this year, he started off slow, and he's been one of the hottest hitters in baseball lately. And that's Christopher Morel, who has 4 home runs, 10 RBIs, 2 stolen bases, and 4 runs in his last week alone, and a 367 on base. I just don't think that's this guy. You know, a lot of his, if you look at his numbers on the season, 8 home runs, 24 RBIs, 4 stolen bases, 21 runs scored. Those are huge production numbers. If you can pawn that off to someone, and again, I always say with the sell high, don't be afraid to be wrong. You might be wrong on some of these where you sell a guy and he continues to be great. But if you could get a haul for Christopher Morel, I don't think Christopher Morel is freaking Shohei Ohtani. You know what I mean? He's the number 3 fantasy ranked player in the last week behind Ohtani and Harper. So I don't think he's that. So my point is that if you can get a haul for him, if somebody's willing to overtrade for him, do it. Go get him. That's my point about Christopher Morel. That's when I say sell high, because I don't think he's going to be this. We know guys have up and downs. His numbers are going to even out, and I think that means, unfortunately for him, that his numbers are going to come down. I have to give you the prospect report, and I'm excited to give it to you. Because this weekend, Paul Skeens is making his first start, a guy who Vince has been talking about and clamoring about for this whole time. And the episode that he's not here, Skeens is making his debut, and guess who he's doing it against? He's doing it against Vinny's Cubs. Yeah! I feel like Vince has been more part of this episode than he's ever been in the past. Like, even when he's here, he's not as involved in the episode because I've mentioned him so many times, and I've talked about so many Cubs. Just how I feel about this episode. But yeah, Paul Skeens, I'm excited for it. You should be excited for it. He's stud pitcher, number 1 prospect for the Pittsburgh Pirates, and he's finally coming up and making his debut. It's a big deal for Major League Baseball. It's a big deal for him. I'm excited for him, and I can't wait to see it. So, for Vince D'Amato, I'm Rami Levy. Until next time, this is the Just Fantasy Baseball podcast. If you guys could all please like, subscribe, share the podcast. It helps us grow. Really share it with a friend. It supports. If you comment on Instagram, Twitter, wherever, YouTube, please leave your questions. We could do mailbag episodes if you leave your questions. We have a lot of fun stuff going on with this podcast. I enjoy it, so I hope you do too. And until next time, I'll see you all later. Peace.